Transform your CRM with the Salesforce integration through HubCore. The HubCore integration, designed to revolutionize your CRM ERP experience. This advanced integration leverages the power of HubCore technology to enhance the functionality and efficiency of your Salesforce system. Here's a glimpse of some benefits of the HubCore Salesforce integration. Real-time data sync. Enhanced decision-making with immediate data updates. Bi-directional synchronization. Seamlessly integrate your Salesforce CRM and Sightline ERP systems for flawless data harmony. Customized configuration. Tailor the integration to fit your unique business needs. This webinar will show you how to transform your Salesforce CRM into a dynamic, integrated platform that drives growth and efficiency. Experience the transformative impact of the Salesforce integration through HubCore. This integration is not just about enhancing your current system, it's about reimagining the potential of your Salesforce CRM, turning it into a dynamic, integrated platform that drives business growth and operational excellence. Welcome to HubCore Salesforce Integration Webinar.
We do integrate with other products as well, but today we're going to talk about the Salesforce piece, which is this piece here. But we do other CRM system too. We have Microsoft CRM, and not as active as Salesforce. Salesforce is certainly the bigger one that we do. HubSpot as well, not as feature-rich as Salesforce, but that's something that people start having interest on. We do some of that now, but again, Salesforce is the big one that we do integration to. And there's other products around here too. I'm not going to get through it, but everything from e-commerce to API automation, and so on. So I'm just going to skip to my next slide. So if any other interest, you can certainly reach out if there's anything else you'd like to hear or have a one-on-one demo on. So again, we're talking about the HubCore Salesforce Sightline interface. So wait this interface. I think I have an out. You need to block somebody. Have to turn off their mic here. I have a little echo. So please mute yourself if you're not muted. Okay, so we're going to talk about the, again, Salesforce Sightline interface, the HubCore, and it's an interface that works both on cloud and on-prem. Cloud is, we started years ago to do that. I would say we started with on-prem, but cloud obviously is our primary focus. But as we know, we have a lot of customers out there, lots of customers in Sightline on-prem, so we still offer on-prem solutions to connect to the HubCore to replicate data back and forth. Okay, so what do we cover in this integration? This is kind of a high level. We sync in master data. In master data, we're talking about customers, items, pricing, and so on. And again, we can sync pretty much all of it, but there's certain things that people ask us over and over again for when we're talking about integration. I can cover that later on, which ones are the highest requested objects that we sync, but that's the master data. And then we have sales. And again, see these as kind of the different modules, because people typically buy this as groups of modules. So we have more, if you look at sales, we have screens or interfaces we already developed so they can kind of get a group of integrations with that module. So sales is quote, opportunity quote to orders, syncing customers, invoices and shipments and so on. And then we have a forecasting module that just kind of projects, if you want to combine backlog, invoices to projecting, quarterly, projections, monthly projections. So we kind of put together pieces together, and then we can display it in one place. Also, we cover service module, rental, and projects. Those are the big areas. But again, in theory, we can replicate any of the Sightline objects into Salesforce. It's just some objects does not really make sense to have in Salesforce. So these are the big ones that we kind of covered. So here are some of the master records. Again, I just talked about the accounts, contacts. I'm not going to get into the detail here, but each of them for this screen. But one thing I want to point out, we also do have some real-time API calls. So some areas where we need pricing, for example, Sightline or Salesforce have a very flat pricing catalog that is basically based on an item, based on a certain tier. You have the pricing. Sightline has with matrices and things like that. So some customers, we actually have an API call that calls directly from Salesforce into Sightline to get that pricing, so they can get it correctly on the quote. And also we have for inventory availability. If you're a customer that has a lot of inventory and you don't want to sync it to Salesforce, some customers still want to. We have one just went live right now, and they synced. They didn't have that many items, so they were able to replicate the inventory to Salesforce. But typically, that's not a good practice. We like to obviously store where the data is, and that changes quite a bit. So you can have an API call that can get you inventory availability directly from Salesforce. And then there's some other product here, like terminology between Salesforce and Sightline, items and products and so on. A little bit different, but that's kind of what we do here. The next thing is sales. This is the sales area. We have a lot of different areas we can do, but the primary one that we see again is the blue ones, right? The blue ones here that we can, again, take an opportunity, turn it into a quote, push it in, and then create it in Sightline as a custom order. So the blue ones are the big ones here, but we do see the other ones too. So if you buy them as a module, we offer all of them in one suite and get them kind of all pre-configured, but some customers end up maybe as using certain ones of these. And these are the big ones that we have. And then we have some customers that enhances this. There's some standard obvious integrations we've done, but their customers now we involve with two major customers that do multi-site, multi-currencies, and that gets more complex when you do these things. So I can talk about that later if anyone is interested. This is the other modules, and I'm not going to get into this. Is the forecast piece. What I'm saying is we can get all the revenue projections and bookings into Salesforce. It's one big customers that needed this feature, so we built that into the product. And here is the project, basically mapping projects to tasks. So if you're a company that uses project, the links to orders, you need this module here to basically see the visibility from projects all the way to orders. If you do, whatever revenue milestones and whatever recognized, but if you use the project module, you need that area. Again, service. The big thing here we see in the service module people do is service orders, service contracts, service appointments, cases and incident is big. That people can put and initiate. Again, it's typically one that's master in the flow. So in this case, what people do is they initiate the incident in Sightline. One customer here, they do installations. They initiate an incident in Sightline, which then triggers it into a case in Salesforce. It's a multinational company. They're using this, and they have the cases, and the cases then they do installations. They're using the cases to do installation, and once they completed this, it feeds back and it posts back to incidents and updates the incident once it's closed out. So they're using the incident to schedule tasks to be done, to installation to be done through cases in Salesforce. And Salesforce then obviously have capabilities to visualize that on having handheld terminals, handheld devices or whatever, and see these cases and organize this better than Sightline possibly can do. So so these customers that use this feature like the feature of Salesforce to schedule these tasks. Rental, just another area of service, and I don't want to get into the detail of this at this time unless in the end someone wants to talk about that. So again, I'm going to get into some screens here, but just to kind of overview. So from Salesforce to Sightline, what do we typically see that people do, just a high level, and we can just show you those things. Typically, we see an account being converted into a customer in Sightline. So in Salesforce, you can create an account. You can create an account as a prospect account, like something that has not yet been converted. So we have different types. You can have different types in Salesforce. And eventually, then once the account is you have an order for it, you want to convert it over. And then we have a method to trigger that from Salesforce to say, okay, convert this account into a customer. And at that time, we push it in. If you're single site, you push it into that site. And we also offer multi-site capability. So if you want to push this account, one customer wants to see it in the main site as well as their site they want to do it to in France, UK, whatever. So we have, using Ion Flow, that's how this is connected. And Ion Workflow can connect that and actually kick off a flow and then create these in both sites. So that's what we see on the account section. And some people do a very basic thing, just filling in the address in Salesforce and submit it. We see other people that fill in much more information on the Salesforce side, but typically it's very basic things. And then Sightline, you default some values, and then in Sightline you do more detail of credit hold, the credit limits, and all that stuff. but at least you can set up default values by site and things like that we have. So it's all depending on what you want to do and what we integrate there. But typically it's very light on the Salesforce side of filling in fields, but we have default values, and then in Sightline it takes over there to fill in the rest. Ship to, we see both there. People typically do, if you initiate the first account and you have a ship to record on that account that you want to create up front, we create it. But after that, we typically use Sightline to sync that back to Salesforce. But you can do both if you want to create them in Salesforce, but Salesforce doesn't really have a good way of doing it. But we have developed for a few customers a separate object in Salesforce to maintain the ship to. We also have some customers that are creating accounts by ship to. Typically it's the build to account that's the account, and then the individual ship to is just a subcomponent from the parent. But there's some customer they want to see the account as ship to, and we can handle that as well. And again, I've talked about multi-site, we can do that. Again, the next thing is quote to order. And Salesforce you can enable an object called quote that you can do it from an opportunity, that you create a quote and push it in as an order. So we're using that feature to basically confirm that and say, okay, this is now one. Once it's approved or won, or you change the status of this, it converts that quote into an order, and it creates it in Salesforce order object, and you will see that order showing up in Sightline. In Sightline, created it with its next sequential number in Sightline, and it flows back to Salesforce, and you can see that order within Salesforce. We also got involved with companies that are using Infor-EQ. I want to mention it here. There's a separate flow really, but in Salesforce you have a plugin for EQ. So if any of you guys have using Sightline's EQ module, it could also be part of the hub core flow, because when you're using Infor-EQ, you can trigger it, you can create a quote, but then once the quote is approved, you need to trigger that record or that account in Salesforce to create a customer. So what we have worked with those customers, they're using Infor-EQ part of Salesforce, is to automate the flow to create the customer automatically upon approval of that quote, and then it creates it syncs back to EQ. So within EQ you can then take that customer and create an order, and it flows directly from EQ into Sightline. And once the order is created in Sightline, it flows back to Salesforce, and you see the order that was created from Infor-EQ. And then again, I may mention here cases. It's again, we see quite a bit if you look at services. So from Sightline to Salesforce, we can do anything really. We have a fairly flexible system that we can basically create and replicate any object into Salesforce, but we have already predefined some Salesforce schema that we have this data stored in Salesforce. So these are the typical ones that we see. So customers, again, you can create it from Salesforce and trigger it back Salesforce into Sightline, but for some customer when they create it in Sightline and create an account in Salesforce, we can do that as well. We can also maintain updates. So if anything changes, if you want to see open orders, posted balance, and replicate that data after it's been created, we offer that too. So updating back to Salesforce, you can see that information close to real time in Salesforce. Again, ship to, if you add ship tos, typically we see that in Sightline that flows to Salesforce, and you have some people don't do it in Salesforce at all. They don't deal with ship to. Some people, again, we have a separate object that we can maintain ship to. Items, which is standard items in Sightline. When you create an item, update items, we create a product in Salesforce. Salesforce require that to, if you want to link an order line or quote or something, we can do that. And again, we can filter on that. So not all items in Sightline will be replicated to Salesforce. So it may only be the top level finished good items that you want to show in Salesforce. Obviously, sub-assembly or finished, raw material you may not like to replicate. So we can set up filters in the flow as we update and trigger that to Salesforce. Pricing, again, Sightline's pricing, we offer to replicate the Salesforce price book. And again, we have orders, replicate order head or order line with the detail, shipment related to this order. We support both regular order shipment and pick, pack, ship. Invoices, header invoices and lines. Again, incidents to case, RMA, and projects. And the last one here is something we just developed about 5-6 months ago. That it's a pretty neat feature that the customer wants to see. This is for cloud customers. If you have using Info document management, and instead of replicating a lot of detail into Salesforce like invoices, that's what this customer wants to do. Is they don't want to see everything with the lines, but they want to see the original invoice. So what we've done is within the invoice form, that's a screen that you have the invoice ID, we have a button within Salesforce that you can click on, which then goes into Sightline and streams the document. We can actually show them an invoice or a contract. So this customer using it on the opportunity as well as on invoices. But again, any document really, if there's a link, we can extract now. So we have the capability to push a button within Sightline, within Salesforce, and then show the documents. So, okay, so let's get into some of the screens here. So here's the screen just to show you kind of a product in Salesforce. You can see here there's some data here that comes. We typically prefix it with CSI on these forms. We have some standard forms, but in-house, if you have Salesforce in-house, you can change the forms and hide views, whatever. But we replicate quite a few fields to begin with, but you can add more fields, you can hide whatever. But here's just a sample of a customer that replicated the on-hand balance and what's being committed within Sightline. And then that's that screen. So that's a product form. This is just to show a price list in Salesforce, a price book. So here, if you're familiar with Sightline, you have several price tiers, right? So that would be each of those price tiers will be a price book. Again, Salesforce out of the box is fairly limited when it comes to pricing. So if you want to do more advanced, we can connect that through the direct API, real-time API. When you create the quote, you can push it, you get the price and create it on the quote. Okay, so then I'm going to switch over to the accounts. So again, account is the same as customers in Sightline. So this is just a typical view. This is a custom view, they call it in Salesforce. I'm just going to show you this is just some records. This is the CSI, the customer number in Sightline. You can customize any form, but this is kind of where you start. And you can see the customer number that's been assigned from Sightline coming back to Salesforce, and we have this a number assigned. So how do we create this from Salesforce from Salesforce to Sightline? We have a screen. If you go back here, and there's a field up here called New, and the New field is the one that we push to basically bring up a screen. And in Salesforce, you can create different flows. If you want to create a new prospect or create a new ERP account or whatever, you can have different forms or fields. For the fields that you want to fill in. So here's just an example of one to create the customer. So you fill basically in the fields, and then this one we have a flag. You can do by flag, you can have a button, but here's basically trigger this to Sightline. So once you fill everything in and hit save, this gets triggered through Salesforce via HubCore into Sightline via Ion, and eventually then the customer gets created and it coming back to Salesforce and it takes about 30 seconds to 45 seconds depending on the load, but it comes in, assigns the next sequential customer, and then it pushes it back to Salesforce, and then you will see it within Salesforce like these fields here, like the Sightline. Let's see here, these fields here, that's called Sightline External ID, and you can see it there. So that's kind of how the flow of how we creating an account from Salesforce into Sightline's customer. So then let's talk about these screens here a little bit. So in Salesforce accounts, we kind of get, that's the whole beauty of Salesforce, right? And linking this up to Sightline is you can get the visibility within Salesforce, like a 360 visibility. So what you see here is an account, and on the account record we can pretty much add anything related to CSI field. I think, I don't know, for the next slide, show you more field. Yeah, here it's just some other fields that you're probably familiar with, Sightline field, but pretty much anything you see on the Sightline screen, you can push to Salesforce. So you basically get that, everything related to that account as the header record, but then there's also related objects. So on the right side, you can see anything around that account. So depending on what you're syncing, on the right, you can see then the shipment record against that account and the orders, RMAs, anything related to that account. So you can get everything from one screen. You can click on that, and I show you another slide of how those records will look like. So again, this is an account screen in Salesforce. And some of these here, you can see up on top here, account record type. That's kind of how we use the different classifications. So in Salesforce, you can have account type. There are prospects or other categories, but once it becomes a type, we assign it as a CSI customer. And in this case, we logged in as a super user. So you do see here we have edit. You can edit the fields even if the account is assigned, but typically we lock it down, or there's an optional thing depending on how a customer wants to do it, that that address changed, and to sync it should really be maintained in Sightline afterwards to sync back to Salesforce. Okay, so this is just another screen again we showed. And here's just another view, just another look of related. It's just a different look. In Salesforce, you can change. Let's see here. I think it's changed automatically. So on top here, you can see related links here. So here's the one with 10 orders on the right side. This is just another way of looking at it within Salesforce. Okay, and this is just another screen again, just showing in Salesforce Sightline data. This is a customer that has a bunch of orders in the bottom, has different shipping addresses, so on. So that's kind of how that looks. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of go through a flow here, how we look, and then I can show you some real demo as well on this. So here, I'm just going to take you through a typical flow. So here in Salesforce, if you're using the opportunity, you can create the opportunity, as you know, in Salesforce, right? It's the standard Salesforce. And then on the right side here, we have a thing called new quote. And that's a Salesforce object you can enable to show that. And if you do that, you can fill it in here and just put in information about the quote. You can pick the next screen after this, you pick the parts and everything, and you can create a quote, you can submit it to the customer. Once this quote comes back, and this is where we come in, is once it comes back and gets approved, let me show you this screen, I think, is it? Yeah, so here, I'm sorry. Here's the quote line, I want to show you that. And then I want to show you, yeah, this screen here, so accepted. So once it gets back and gets accepted, it then pushes it in and creates an order. So you can use the Salesforce quote objects and create a quote, put the parts in, price it, submit to customers, and accept it. And once you hit the accept, it then triggers it, right? And then it triggers it in and create an order within Sightline. So this then turns into an order that looks like this. And then the order information then flows back to Salesforce and puts it on that quote and create a new order record in Sightline. Oh, in Salesforce, I'm sorry. Yep. So that's kind of the flow from, again, go back here, opportunity, creating an opportunity, creating a quote, and then convert this quote into accepting the quote and converting it into an order. That flow we have out of the box. The other thing we also offer with customer, I mentioned, that has the EQ integration. So then this will be a plugin you have if you have EQ, where you can trigger this from within Salesforce and create an EQ quote, and the quote gets created. This company here using PandaDoc, which is a flow of documenting a PDF, and they're using it as a workflow. And then once the PandaDoc gets approved, it actually triggers the flow to HubCore to create that customer. And once the customer is created, it goes to the EQ and then updates the customer there, so you can convert the quote into an order. So that's the EQ flow. So, so again, this is the quote to order. And here's the customer order again. That's after it's been converted. And again, typical information is, order the customer you're selecting, the ship to. Again, if you have that information and fill it in Salesforce, the ship to will be assigned. But if you don't, it will default to the ship to 0, and then you have to do it in Sightline. But again, if you have that information and sync the ship to, you can have a drop-down list on the quote, they can pick to ship to and push it over to Sightline's custom order screen. And then I think that's it pretty much here on this screen. We do reference here, you can see the object, that's the Salesforce object here, called it confirmation reference. So we always reference back to the original Salesforce object on any records when it comes to Sightline, customers, orders, quote, whatever we have. We always have a link back so we know where it came from, so we can sync this record. So if anything changed here, we can then trigger the changes and update it back to Salesforce. So that's what happened here, right? So quote went from Salesforce into Sightline, create an order number, and then this again shows back up in Salesforce. You can see the order number then assigned in Salesforce. You can see it here. And any changes then will be reflected in Salesforce as you do changes. So this is an order header, and here is just a view of the line items on that order. This is a different order, I think, that I have on the screen. But this particular screen shows not only the order lines, but also an invoice and invoice lines. So again, that flows after the order has been shipped and invoiced, then those shipment record and invoice flows back to Salesforce, and you can see that. Here's again, just to show you what we have, but again, this is pretty crowded, so all of these fields may not be needed, but here you have a view of a Sightline invoice within Salesforce, with all different fields. But again, one thing I want to point out here, it's up in the right corner, we have a thing called IDM file view. So if you click on that, in this customer, they want to see it, so they can go into Sightline if they're using cloud customers, and then pull out that invoice document out of Sightline's IDM, and then pop up on the screen. I think I have a screen that shows you that. Here's just a picture of a case in Sightline. This was for an installation they did, a company that uses Sightline to create incident, and they push it into Salesforce as a case, and then they maintain it in Salesforce, and then once they completed it, it pushes it back to Sightline's incident. This particular one is just this is just a view of a document to show you that you can actually push, and this is a document, a contract document that you can actually push and display it, within Salesforce. Again, we don't store any kind of objects or documents in Salesforce. We could, but to minimize the load on the Salesforce side and not replicate too much, we just have a hyperlink or link into IDM that streams the data back and then shows the PDF document within Salesforce. So with that, I'm going to turn it over here to my assistant Raghu. Any questions right now so far? Questions, comments, anything? And if we can show you some just real screens. We can't go through the whole thing. If you want really a more intensive demo, we'd like to offer that one-on-one with you if you're interested in what we have. We just want to show you kind of what we cover here in this meeting, kind of very high level, to get you kind of a high level view of what the integration would typically look like. But I'm going to stop sharing here and go ahead, Raghu, and turn on your screen.
Pontus, you got a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, good. Contract and contract prices. Yes. Are you talking about the service orders here? Is that what we're talking about? I think we done that.
No.
I'm
talking about Sightline contracts and Sightline contract prices related to customer order pricing.
I got it. Yes. We have done that for one or two customers. It's very simple. You're talking about the contract used to be called customer item cross-reference, right? Back in the days. Yes. Yep.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, we done that. Now, I have to say, though, we done it to replicate, to see it. The issue there is that we can see the contract price, but if you're using Salesforce as a way of pricing things out, right? It's using the standard catalog, right? So pricing catalog. So if you replicate, you can see the contract price, but it's not really working, to show that when you price it out in Salesforce that it looks at that record. So if you're really using contract price, you really should use more of a real-time API, because then if you have a certain customer wanting a specific item, then that specific item have certain quantity breaks, we will probably recommend to use the API, direct API. So, okay, I hope that answers your question there. The next, is there any flow set up to bring opportunities over to Sightline customers? Yes, you could. We certainly could. We certainly could. Thank you. We can certainly could. We don't see that actually. As we get into each customer, when we starting this, every time we quoting, they want to do this and this, and typically what happens is they realizing that, you got to use what's best, right? I mean, Salesforce is a great, obviously, sales opportunity management tool. So that's where it should be. Now, can we sync that opportunity to Sightline's opportunity? Absolutely. The only problem there is if you have customer now that are prospects, they're not existing in Sightline, are you going to push them over then to prospect tables, right? So, we do have one actually customer right now we're working with that's HubSpot. They do integrate the HubSpot, and they actually do the other way around. They do everything in Sightline and creating opportunities and quotes and everything, and then we move that into HubSpot. So they're doing it that direction, but typically we don't do it, but can it be done? Yes, but again, you kind of have to, is there flow to set up to bring opportunities over to Sightline customers? I'm not sure, maybe you can elaborate on that, Richard, if I'm missing. Is there any flow to set up, you're talking about the opportunities object in Salesforce, right? Is that correct?
Well, actually in Sightline, they also call it opportunities back with the old
okay, yes, okay.
customers. So
talking about syncing.
It's both ways. I just wonder if there's a flow set up, and I agree that it is better to set it up in Salesforce, and then if you have some flow to bring it over to Sightline, i.e. if you have opportunities in Salesforce, create Sightline customers from that.
Yep, that's kind of what we see. So typically people use Sightline. We have one that using Sightline out for all the quotes and everything, and now they want to kind of move to Salesforce, so they have to untangle to get out of the estimates and Sightline, move everything to Salesforce, because if you do that, it kind of works more native. Otherwise, why invest in something like Salesforce? I mean, Salesforce is where you can manage the quote good, you can manage prospect, you can do all the contact management. And the same thing with contacts. We can sync contacts between the two systems, but we really try to avoid that, right? Because Sightlines, in my opinion, contact management is very, if you compare with Salesforce, it's pretty weak, right? But there's times you want to see both of them, but typically we try to avoid replicating those from Salesforce into Sightline. So typically people don't do that. So, okay, so go ahead, Raghu, and show your screen again. So let's just show a couple of screens so we can show the real screen. I hate to just do PowerPoint here, but so here is a screen that the demo system, it's showing us the listing of accounts. So why don't we just click on one of those accounts right there. And here you can see some objects that are related objects. So you can click on orders, for example. So here you can click on the related orders view. So here you can see some orders. Click on one of those objects there, orders. And this view is a little weak. You can add more fields to that. But so here's an order in Salesforce, and it's stored in the Salesforce order object. If you go to detail there, detail, you can see some of the Sightline data replicated over into Salesforce. So here's the order number that was assigned. We support multi-sites, so multiple orders from different sites. Our primary key that we look at is site and order. So you can have multiple sites flowing into one Salesforce instance. So that's kind of how that looks. And then go back to the related objects. Related. So here is, again, related objects. This case is only an order. That's probably not shipped yet. And then here you have some order history where you can see all the Salesforce have some audit trails. So when we do the changes, we trigger all those changes and we can see what happened if there's updates to that order and so on. That could be enabled in Salesforce. So then again, that's just an example. I can bring up a product, I guess. So this is again triggered automatically, add, update, delete. We don't delete it out of Salesforce, we just kind of flag it as obsolete. So because if it has a relationship, it's not possible really. But so here's just some fields they want to sync over. So okay, I want to go to accounts again just to kind of show you the flow quickly. I'm not sure if you can pull it off 1141 here, but oh yeah, okay. So here's the price book. So here's the standard Salesforce price book, and this matching Sightline's pricing table. So if you have a pricing table and you update new effective pricing, it have the standard 6 kind of price tiers or price, unit price, what they call it in Salesforce. Oh, Sightline, the unit price, right? Unit price 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So again, if you have contract price, I think maybe this customer maybe wanted to have contract price. I don't know if we put it in here, but again, I have to say though, if you do create a quote in standard Salesforce, it's going to ask you for the price book, and the price book is going to give you a price. So if you do have a contract price in that logic currently, unless we modify that screen in Salesforce, does not include the contract prices in there. If you do contract pricing or matrices and everything, again, API is what we prefer. Because we don't really want to reinvent the price books or price logic in Salesforce. We're trying to stay away from that. Okay, so go to accounts to kind of show you kind of quickly how this works. So when you hit new accounts, I'm going to go new accounts up in the right corner. You can do there. So new accounts, we can, again, Salesforce, you can have different flows or different screens. I'm just going to do a regular Sightline customer. And in here, we can go in and fill in some of the information. Just a test account. And again, you can create as many fields as you want to pass over. Typically what we see is a minimum number of records here that fills in. Salesforce out of the box, to my knowledge, or I think what we've seen is they don't have really an address validation. You see it's fairly free form, but what people end up doing is they buy some add-ons in Salesforce so they can validate some of these addresses. Especially if you're using something like Valera, taxes, we kind of got some trouble there. So we put more validation up front so we don't get the errors, right? I'm pushing it into Sightline. And here we're just going to submit that to Sightline. And we hit save here. It goes into, submits it out of Salesforce into HubCore and then via Ion. And then we have a workflow which then creates the customer record. So and then eventually here, if you go back to the screen here, we're going to copy paste, but in the bottom here, if you scroll down on the screen, right? So here we have the record created, but in here we have a Sightline ID, which now is blank, which has not been created, but it has been submitted, right? It's been sent to be created. So then, usually depending on the workload, but usually max a minute, I would say. We typically see these, coming back, so if you switch over to Sightline and show it there, it should show up here then, one of these records. If you hit the filter and the customers, it should then show up here. And then once it shows up here, then it again, bi-direction goes from Salesforce into Sightline, create the customer account, and then it pushes us back out, replicate it back out to Salesforce and update that field that it's being created. Okay, so here's the account. Again, just basic address, but other fields like bank code was never asked for up front. So some of that stuff is mapped in the middle layer. So bank code, credit limits. If you click on the other tabs there. But again, we're using an Ion workflow here. So one customer wants to create one flow and then create it in multiple sites. So they always create in one customer. So we can do stuff like that. They create it in one site and then at the same time the other sites. Obviously multi-currency, things like that we can support here too. So it could be pretty complex. Ion workflow, if anyone want to work with you, could be pretty complex if you want to make it complex. But the basic integration we do is typically just creating an account, push it in and fill in the fields. So now if you switch back to Salesforce and hit the refresh, you should see that record now assigned to that account. you should see the Sightline account. So now from this time forward, did we get it back yet? No, I don't know if we see it there yet, but it should show up here in a bit, so we can maybe go back to that, but it should come back here within a certain time period. Then same thing. So then once the account has been assigned, it's then we can so in the area when you do quote order, right, you need to have a customer in the system before you can put an order in. So those could be automated too. So if you have a quote and push the quote in, and then the quote then turns into an order, you have to push the customer in first, the account. So some of that could be automated. So you just push the quote, but create the customer. So you can have it either separately or not, but you certainly cannot put in the customer in. You cannot push it into it, without having the account in Sightline. Okay, so what else do I have here? 1146. So I'm not going to get in too much more deep here into the screen. If there's something specific you want to cover, I have a couple more things that I'd like to cover. I'm not sure who's on the call here, if it's end users or technical people. So anyone wants to know more technical stuff? Anyone? Hands up if they want to know a little bit more how we do the mapping between the systems. Anyone? If they do, raise your hand and I can talk about that a little bit. If not, I can at least talk a little bit about it. I don't see any hands up here, but oh, there you go. Okay, good. We got a hand up. So I'm going to switch over here to my screen again. And I'm going to do this. You see my screen again? Okay, so let's talk some tech talk here, right? Okay, so let's just show a little bit here. So how do we do this and how do we make these sync? So what we have is on the Salesforce side, we do have some standard objects we added. And we have done it, again, customer don't want all of them. We don't put them in, but based on what the requirements are, what module they buy. But in this case, you can see here, you have the standard invoice, shipment objects, because some of that stuff doesn't exist in Sightline, in Salesforce, I'm sorry. So we basically create another, it's very similar to Sightline's, SQL, you can create your own tables and UAT and everything, right? So here is the object, and we have the field names. And what we've done is the field names are similar to Sightline. So we have cost PO, discount amount, CO num. So having them the same, what that allows us to do is when we actually bring in that payload, we call it, to push it in, because we actually developed a specific app on the Salesforce side that does the receiving record that we push in, the API call, and we are able to, so you don't need to map some of the standard fields, really, it happens automatically. So all the field names are the same between the two systems. It will then, once you add it into Salesforce, it automatically shows up in that object, and then you can place that field on any of the forms in Salesforce. So we don't need to map one by one. So most of them are auto-mapped. However, if there are some fields that have different naming convention. In this screen here, you can see we have something called unit_measure, and in Sightline it's coming in as UM. So here's an example of where we kind of map it to a different field. But we can also do other things. You can look it up from an external table. So we've done some mapping here. So this allows us to be pretty flexible of how we pushing data from Sightline into Salesforce. So pretty much any object at this time, we just kind of do what customers want us, but if we get a one-off thing and we get that every so often, can you do this? Yeah, we can do that. So anything we can pretty much replicate anything with this concept. We can create another table, we can create more fields, and we can stick it into Salesforce, in theory. So you can, but again, the standard objects we built is around obviously sales and invoice and shipments and all that stuff, but in theory everything that in Sightline you can replicate out, and we can create objects and you can map it into Salesforce. I hate to be technical too here, but just this is a kind of a flow that we do. Again, each customer may have different, but here's kind of show you at least kind of how typically when we set everything up for customers, we're trying to kind of get this flowed out, because every customer may have a slightly different flow. So we kind of trying to prepare this. So when we go into customers, how much is it? Is it 100% fit? No. There's areas where either they have an idea of syncing this to this, and we work it out, and we do. So the experience we bring is not only Salesforce integration. Myself, I worked with Sightline over 30 years. We have Salesforce people on our staff that also have worked with Salesforce quite a bit, and then we have integration people that knows the middle piece. So we try to bring everything from beginning to the end. So we try to put together a flow that works for that customer. So the connectors are, pretty much out of the box. However, each customer that we see right now obviously have a slightly separate flow. That's just reality. But all that stuff we can handle through the Ion workflow that's pretty flexible, and mapping things in the apps that we have in Salesforce, and the middle layer called HubCore, where we can allow to do certain things with it. So in summary, it's 11:51 here, so I'm going to see it and I can see if I have more questions. But in summary, what is the benefit of this? I mean, again, Salesforce is the best of breed, we believe, that's what we selected to integrate this years ago. And we spent a lot of time. It took really a year before we felt like we have a really good platform before we really start selling it. So it took a long time to really build it, because Salesforce is very, very deep. So we had a lot of people we interacted with to build that out. But having this platform, Salesforce is very rich in CRM. Obviously, you guys know Sightline does have a CRM module. So for some customer, that's fine. But the people that need that extra kind of visibility and having that Salesforce experience, and again, on top of that, see the Sightline data as a 360 view and see everything. That's the big thing, right? And then be able to kind of handle all the prospects and everything outside Sightline, creating the opportunity, creating a quote order, having that flow, maintain it, and whatever Salesforce offers with different flows and automation they can do, that's pretty good. EQ, so if you're using Sightline's EQ module is very strong configurator. So you could connect that to Salesforce. So that's another way for configure. Salesforce have their own CPQ as well. But if you want to go in you have that EQ, which then can obviously create the bill of materials and everything, and can link to Salesforce. So that's a good thing. And that's something we've recently been involved with a couple of big customers that are doing that flow. So we've been filling that flow, because just having that out of the box doesn't do everything. So we kind of complement of creating the customers and syncing orders and everything through there. And again, all the front office, then basically you move it away from Sightline. You don't keep it there. So this thing of having an opportunity in Sightline, should it be there? No, probably should be all in CRM. So you move everything in there. You have everything in the front end, and then push it back to the back office to create the orders and do everything on the back end, which Sightline is great at. And then again, this thing of viewing the documents, we believe it's a pretty slick feature that you'll be able to link it up to get the visibility out to Salesforce users to see those documents. So I think that's it. So Q questions. What do we have here? I'm going to turn off my screen here. And do we have any other questions coming in here? I think we have your hands up. Richard, do you have any more? Or was that hands up on the technical thing? I don't know.
Yes. I was just wondering, is there any data actually stored in HubCore, or is it just between Sightline and its HubCore pass-through to go to Salesforce?
It's really a pass-through. There's some areas we store some mapping, but we're trying to avoid that, right? We don't want to have customers' data on our servers, but it's really what HubCore is. It's a cloud server app that we developed over the years that has a lot of connectors that we built over the years. You saw the first screen we had, right? So that cloud HubCore piece have connectors for other things, like again for e-commerce and for everything. So what we have seen is by having everything there may be some customers that something that comes out of Salesforce, they need an e-commerce or vice versa. So having it in one place. So yeah, we don't store too much. Now we do have a product, I don't know if you saw my slide there, that's called Hub Data, which we offer too, which basically is for customers that want to have access to data externally. So we do have a product that allows to replicate data from Sightline to an external database. And HubCore is hosted on AWS because that's part of Sightline, but the Hub Data, we actually, I don't know if you saw any other Sun meetings on that, but webinars, but the Hub Data we do through Azure, and it's basically an SQL database. We're using HubCore technology that basically have an external SQL database externally that we get out there. So customers that won't have access to data, that's how we do it. So I'm not sure if that answers you, Richard, your question there, but HubCore, no, but Hub Data, yes. So.
Yes, thank you. Just simply HubCore's the pass-through. That's what I need.
Yes, that's kind of where it is. Yep, it's a HubCore. We typically, there's some areas on some products that we have to keep some data. With some products to kind of get the whole picture. Some of the API automation tools we keep some data there to verify certain things. Like vendors and payees, just to make sure we have the right primary ID and stuff. But most of it in Salesforce area, there it's very limited what we keep in the middle. It's more the connector piece to make sure we route it and we build, connect it and push it in. It's basically an extension to Ion, right? Ion does certain things, but we kind of do the connector piece, in the middleware. So, and then also by doing that, we can support if there's any upgrades and Salesforce connectors and so on. We kind of own that piece, so we don't need to go back and again, this actually is very also the other thing that's a benefit of what we've done, and that's part of the HubCore design is we don't modify anything really in Sightline with this. There's some UAT fields we're adding on some screens really. But other than that, for the Salesforce integration, we don't go in and modify the code in Sightline. So if you're on the cloud and upgrade, most of it it's an Ion. It's calling standard IDOs. So it's very so when you do get uplifts and stuff, it will not break. I say that you never know what you don't know, but I would say that at least we don't go in and modify custom assemblies and all that stuff within Sightline. It's a very external, most of the code is residing on Salesforce, HubCore, and the Ion workflow. So, any other question? Richard, you got 5-star here. You got a couple of questions. Anyone else here? We have 11:57, 3 more minutes. But again, if there are no other questions, you're all welcome to schedule a direct call. We have Chester on the call. He's our contact person, or Gladdy. I can bring it up on the screen here, but if anyone wants a one-on-one and get more deeper into this, we're happy to do so and ask any more specific questions and more specific demos. Chester, I think, is on here, and he can, right? Hello, Chester, you're on the call, right? So yeah, I think yes. You have, yeah. So we can provide that information. You can email here after this call. I'm going to bring it up on the screen either way, but we also have Sam as well that you can reach out to here. So let me show you my screen. So I think that's it, 11:58. I don't want to keep you longer. So hopefully I gave you an overview. Again, this is just a small piece. Salesforce is very big. You can do a lot of cool stuff with Salesforce, but we're trying really to kind of set up a flow, right? Learning the best practices from experience we have with Sightline, experience we have with Salesforce. So yeah, it was a long journey to get this going, and now we really start reaping the benefit, I believe, with our product, because we can now install it fairly quick. It's pretty stable. It's flexible, that we can add more objects to it. So that's kind of where we are with our product at this time. So anyway, thank you very much.